He promised he would never love again, until the woman he could barely tolerate became the one thing he couldn't resist. When the war between his quiet little record shop and her noisy art studio began, something unexpected ignited. Attraction, sparks, and a desire neither of them could deny. And now you'll discover how two grown adults who had already given up on love ended up finding their second chance in the worst and best neighbor possible. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share the story with anyone you know who loves a good romantic comedy. The Spinning Stories vinyl shop was on the corner of Main Street and Harbor Avenue, in a red brick building that had bravely resisted modernity since 1942. Trip Clark had inherited the place from his uncle 7 years ago and, since then, had transformed that space into a personal sanctuary where time worked in RPM and conversations were accompanied by Fleetwood Mac or Miles Davis, depending on the mood of the day. On that Tuesday morning, he was adjusting a pile of jazz records in the classics section, while Bobby Lassance, his best friend since high school, occupied the counter with an extra-large coffee and an expression of someone about to say something annoying. "You know you live like a 70s hermit, right?" Bobby bit into a sugar-covered donut with the conviction of someone who had just made a scientific discovery. Like, "I get the vintage aesthetic of the store, but you don't have to live as if the vinyl record is the only acceptable technology." Trip looked up without raising his head, a gesture he had perfected over the years. "Did you come here just to offend me? Or do you have an actual purpose in life today?" "Both." Bobby took a long sip of coffee. "But mainly, I came to remind you that you are 43, not 80, and that leaving the house after 9 at night is not a federal crime. I go out. Playing pool at Murphy's bar with the same 3 guys doesn't count." Trip put the last record in place and walked to the counter. His coffee was waiting for him in a faded mug with the logo of a band no one remembered anymore. He took a sip and stared at Bobby with that expression that close friends learned to decipher as, "I am about to be sarcastic." "Let me see if I understood correctly," he said, leaning his elbows on the counter. "You who have spent the last 10 months trying to win over the barista at the Salty Cup and failing spectacularly every week, came to my store to give me advice on a social life." Bobby pointed the donut in his direction. "First, she is clearly playing hard to get because she finds my charm irresistible. Second, at least I try. You act as if romance is a contagious disease. Isn't it?" "No. It was for my marriage." Bobby sighed with the patience of someone who had had this conversation about 12 times. "Trip, you got divorced 5 years ago, 5. That is not a recent wound. It is a scar you keep picking at for sport." Trip took another sip of coffee and looked away towards the window, where the morning sunlight was drawing golden patterns on the wooden floor. Outside, Harborview was waking up slowly, as always. The town had that deliberately calm pace of places where everyone knew everyone, and news took weeks to spread. "I am not picking at anything," he replied, turning his attention back to Bobby. "I just learned that living alone is infinitely less complicated than sharing space with someone who decides out of the blue that you are not what she wants anymore." Profound. Bobby finished the donut and wiped his hands on a napkin. But also kind of dramatic coming from a guy who organizes records alphabetically and chronologically at the same time. That is called a system. That is called existential boredom disguised as organization. Bobby got up from the stool and tossed the napkin into the trash, with the precision of someone who played basketball in their youth. "Look, I am not saying you need to go out there like a desperate teenager. I am just suggesting that, I don't know, you consider the possibility that maybe, at some point in the next 5 years, meeting someone wouldn't be the end of the world." Trip arched an eyebrow. "You just used 3 conditionals in the same sentence. Even you do not believe what you are saying." "I do." Bobby picked up the denim jacket he had left on the counter. "I am just being gentle with your stubbornness." "How generous." Bobby smiled in that annoying way that always foreshadowed one last jab before leaving. By the way, I saw a moving van parked next door last night. Someone finally rented that space." Tripp frowned. The store next door had been empty for almost a year, ever since the former tenant, a woman who unenthusiastically sold antiques, decided to move to Florida after her grandchildren. "And why should that interest me?" "Because you love to complain about noise." Bobby opened the dear, making the bell hanging on the frame chime. "And something tells me that whoever is moving in does not have the same appreciation as you for monastic silence." Before Tripp could answer, Bobby was already on the sidewalk, waving over his shoulder as he headed towards the office where he worked as an accountant, and in his spare time, as a professional disturber of other people's peace. Tripp shook his head and went back to the records. New neighbors. Great. Exactly what he needed. On the other side of the wall, in the space that would soon be the Revive and Redesign studio, Michaella Bennett was in the middle of a private war against a toolbox that simply refused to open. She had already tried brute force, gentle persuasion, and for the last 5 minutes creative cursing that would make a sailor blush. "You are a useless, poorly designed piece of metal," she growled at the box, trying to force the latch for the 4th time. "And when I manage to open, you, I am going to throw you into the ocean." "Threatening inanimate objects is already a clear sign of stress," said Penelope Anders from the doorway, where she had just entered carrying a tray with 3 cups of iced coffee. "Or temporary insanity." Michaella looked up and let go of the box with a sigh. "If you brought caffeine, I forgive you for anything that comes after that sentence." "I did." Penelope walked in, followed by Grace White, who was carrying a brown paper bag stamped with the local bakery's logo. And Grace brought croissants, so technically she deserves more forgiveness than me. Grace smiled and placed the bag on a dusty table. "I have always been the favorite friend, only no one admits it." Michaella grabbed one of the coffee cups and took a long sip, feeling the caffeine do its morning resuscitation work. "You two are saints, or accomplices. I am still not sure." "Accomplices sounds more interesting," Penelope said, sitting down in a wooden chair that Michaella had brought from her old house. "So, how is the process of turning this dusty space into a charming studio that will make everyone want to refurbish old furniture?" "Slow." Michaella walked around the space, assessing the peeling walls, the old plank floor, and the windows that needed a deep cleaning. "But I can see the potential. I just need time, patience, and for this darn toolbox to cooperate." Grace picked up a croissant and bit into it delicately. "You have always been good at seeing beauty where other people only see work. It is like your superpower." "My superpower is stubbornness disguised as optimism," Michaella corrected, returning to the toolbox with renewed determination. "But thank you for the gentler version." Penelope crossed her legs and took a sip of coffee. "And how is the adjustment to small-town life? Do you regret leaving Boston yet?" Michaella finally managed to open the latch of the box and raised her arms in a sign of victory before answering. "Not exactly. I mean, I miss the hustle sometimes, but Harborview has a charm of its own. The people here are curious." "Curious in the sense of interested or curious in the sense of nosy?" Grace asked, with that sweet way that hid a sharp perception. "Both." Michaella picked up a hammer from the box and examined the wooden handle. "But I kind of like it. In Boston, I could go weeks without talking to my neighbors. Here, everyone wants to know about my life. In 48 hours. Welcome to the reality of coastal towns." Penelope smiled. "Here, privacy is an abstract concept." Michaella laughed and took a croissant from the bag. "My sister already warned me. She has lived here for 3 years and still has not gotten used to the fact that everyone knows when she buys too much wine at the market." "Speaking of neighbors," Grace said with that tone that always foreshadowed an interesting observation, "have you met the owner of the shop next door yet? The vinyl record one?" Michaella shook her head. "Not personally yet, but I have observed a few things, heard some others." "What did you hear about him?" Grace asked. that he is kind of peculiar, she said. They say he is friendly in a distant way, polite but clearly not interested in long conversations, and he has very strong opinions about music. Strong opinions I can handle. Michaella shrugged. As long as he doesn't complain about the noise, I think we'll get along fine. Grace and Penelope exchanged another glance, this one more significant. What? Michaella asked, narrowing her eyes. Nothing, Grace said too quickly. Just that he is supposedly very methodical with his routine. And his shop is like a temple of silence. So, I don't know, maybe it would be good for you to give him a heads up when you are going to make noise? Michaella arched an eyebrow. Give him a heads up? Like, knock on the wall 3 times before using the drill? It would be polite, Penelope suggested, clearly stifling a laugh. Or it would be ridiculous. Michaella finished the croissant and wiped her hands. Look, I understand that he likes peace and quiet, but this here is a restoration studio. There will be noise. It is part of the job. And the Greek tragedy begins, Penelope muttered to Grace, who tried to hide a laugh with a fake coughing fit. Michaella rolled her eyes. You two are terrible at being subtle. No one said we were subtle, Grace replied with a sweet smile. But let's make a bet. I give it 2 weeks until you and the vinyl shop neighbor get into some kind of argument about something. 2 weeks? Penelope shook her head. I give it 3 days. Are you betting on my ability to annoy strangers? Michaella crossed her arms, more amused than offended. No, Grace corrected. We are betting on your inability not to say what you think when someone is being annoying. That is different. Not much. Michaella was about to answer when she heard the sound of music coming from the wall. Not loud, but audible. Smooth jazz, piano, and upright bass, the kind of music that demanded silent attention. Is that him? She asked, pointing toward the sound. Probably, Penelope confirmed. He always has music playing in the store, like ambient background score. Michaella listened for a few more seconds, assessing. Good taste in music, at least. Wait until you need to turn on. The electric sander, Grace said, standing up and shaking the croissant crumbs off herself. Then you will see if the good taste lasts. The 3 of them laughed, and Michaella turned her attention back to the studio. She had work to do, walls to paint, shelves to install, and a clear vision of what that space could become. Methodical, quiet neighbor? She had dealt with worse. On the other side of the wall, Tripp adjusted the volume on the record player and returned to the counter, completely oblivious to the fact that his life was about to get considerably noisier. And more interesting, but mainly noisier. The noise started on a Friday morning, around 6:20. Tripp was in the middle of a reasonably pleasant dream, involving a deserted beach and 0 responsibilities, when the sound of an electric drill ripped through the silence of Main Street, as if someone had decided to drill through the very fabric of reality. He opened his eyes, disoriented, and took a few seconds to process that the noise was coming from downstairs. From the shop, or rather, from the shop next door. The shop that now had a new tenant. A tenant who clearly did not share his philosophy about civilized hours for loud activities. Tripp rolled over in bed, picked up his phone, and checked the time. 6:22 in the morning. On a Friday. This was practically an auditory assault. The noise stopped for a few seconds, giving him false hope that maybe the person next door had finished whatever they were doing. Then the drill returned, louder, more insistent, now accompanied by the sound of something being dragged across the wooden floor. He sighed, threw the covers aside, and got up with the irritated determination of someone who was about to have an extremely polite and completely sarcastic conversation with a stranger. 20 minutes later, dressed and caffeinated enough not to commit homicide, Tripp walked down the stairs connecting his apartment to the store, crossed the still empty and silent space of spinning stories, and went out the front door. The morning was beautiful, sunny, with that smell of sea air that made Harbor View a tolerable place. He turned left, took 3 steps, and stopped in front of the neighboring shop's door. The old sign that read Miller Antiques had been removed, leaving only the faded mark on the dusty glass. Through the window, he could see movement inside. Someone wearing a white paint-stained t-shirt and ripped jeans was facing away, carrying a wooden plank from one side to the other. Tripp knocked on the door. 3 firm, polite knocks, the kind that said, "I am civilized, but I am also annoyed." The noise stopped. The figure turned her head, said something he could not hear, and then walked to the door. When she opened it, Tripp mentally prepared himself to deal with some kind of clueless home renovation enthusiast. What he did not expect was that the enthusiast would be that. Michaella Bennett had light brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, a few loose strands framing her face. Her eyes were light brown, depending on the light, and were at that moment fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and slight impatience. She held a drill in her right hand, as if it were a natural extension of her arm, and she had a smear of green paint on her jawline that for some reason he preferred not to analyze, was kind of charming. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice had that polite tone that people from the southern United States used when they were being cordial but not necessarily friendly. Tripp blinked, regained control of his own brain functions, and remembered that he had come there with a purpose. "I am Tripp, from the store next door, the record shop." "Nice to meet you." She did not move from the doorway. "Michaella, look, I do not want to be that annoying neighbor," he began, using the most diplomatic tone he could muster at 6:40 in the morning. "But it is 6:40, on a Friday, and the noise—" "It is loud," she finished, raising an eyebrow. "Because that is kind of what happens when you are renovating a space. Noise, it is part of the package." "I understand. I just thought maybe, I do not know, starting after 8 would be more appropriate." Michaella tilted her head to the side, assessing him the same way someone would assess a moderately annoying math problem. "You realize we are in a commercial area, right? It is not exactly a residential zone. I live above my shop." "Ah." She paused. "Well, that is an interesting lifestyle choice." Tripp felt his jaw clench. "It is convenient. Or lonely. Depends on how you look at it. I did not ask for a psychological analysis. I just asked for consideration regarding timing." Michaella crossed her arms, and the drill still in her right hand gave a slightly menacing air to the gesture. "All right, let's clear something up. I have a tight deadline to get this place up and running. That means working early. If that bothers you, I suggest headphones, or moving out. Or you could be a decent neighbor and start at a reasonable hour. 6:30 is reasonable. For whom? For functional adults." Tripp opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by a voice coming from inside the shop. "Mish, do you need help with that shelf, or?" A woman appeared behind Michaella, stopped when she saw Tripp, and smiled the way people smile when they realize they have walked into the middle of something interesting. "Oops. Hi." "Hi," Tripp replied automatically. "This is the vinyl shop neighbor," Michaella explained without taking her eyes off him. "Tripp, he came to complain about the noise." "I did not come to complain. I came to talk. You literally complained for 3 minutes straight. 2 at most." The woman behind Michaella, whom Tripp presumed was a friend or assistant, was clearly trying not to laugh. "Penelope," she said, extending her hand over Michaela's shoulder. "Pleased to meet you." Tripp shook her, and, feeling slightly ridiculous. "Likewise." "So," Penelope continued with a twinkle in her eye that did not bode well, "you are the vinyl guy. Mish said you play classical music all day." "Jazz," he corrected, "and it is not all day. Just most of the day," Michaella added. "You can hear it through the wall. Which is different from using an electric drill at 6 in the morning." 6:20, she corrected, and there was something like amusement in her eyes now. "Let's maintain factual accuracy." Tripp took a deep breath. This woman was annoying, and beautiful, and annoying, and he definitely should not be noticing that she was beautiful because that was completely irrelevant to the situation. "Look, I just want us to come to an agreement. A time that works for both of us. 8 o'clock, she suggested. 9. 8:30. 8:40. Michaella stared at him for a long moment, and then something like a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. You are kind of neurotic, aren't you? I am not neurotic, I am organized. That is what neurotics say. And starting renovations at the crack of dawn is what inconsiderate people do. Crack of dawn. Michaella laughed, a short and surprisingly genuine sound. You talk like it is the 19th century. I talk like someone who likes to sleep until a decent hour. Define decent. Before Tripp could answer, another woman appeared behind Penelope. Shorter, with blonde hair and a sweet expression that contrasted with the gleam of pure amusement in her eyes. You two sound like a couple from a 40s movie arguing about the garden fence. Grace, Michaella said without turning her head, that does not help. I am not trying to help. I am observing. Grace smiled at Tripp. You are exactly how she described you. She described me. Tripp looked at Michaella, genuinely surprised. Casually, Michaella answered too quickly, and not flatteringly. She said you were probably methodical, kind of reclusive, and had strong opinions about things most people do not think twice about, Grace continued, clearly enjoying herself. And she also said the vinyl shop had that do not touch anything without permission vibe. Tripp felt something shift in his thoughts. Not exactly offense, but also not exactly pleasure. That is a pretty specific assessment coming from someone who has never spoken to me. I am observant, Michaella said, and there was something challenging in her tone now. And you have a very predictable routine. You open the store at 9, leave for lunch exactly at noon, and come back an hour later, always with the same brown bag. Are you watching me? No, you are just very predictable, and you are very nosy. Look who is talking. You came all the way here to complain about noise. That is not being nosy. That is establishing boundaries. Penelope and Grace exchanged a look that Tripp could not decipher, but that definitely meant something. Fine, Michaella said, uncrossing her arms and resting the drill on her hip. Let's try this again. I will start working at 8:30. You stop showing up at my door looking like you just bit into a lemon. Deal? Tripp hesitated. The proposal was reasonable, better than 6:20 at least. What about weekends? 9 o'clock because I like to sleep in too when I can. That works. Great. She extended her free hand. So now we are officially neighbors who tolerate each other? Tripp looked at her hand. There was paint on her fingernails, green and white. He shook it anyway, and the touch was quick, firm, completely professional. Except for the part where her skin was unexpectedly soft, and he noticed it more than he should have. Tolerate is a strong word, he said, letting go of her hand. But we will try. Such enthusiasm. I save my enthusiasm for things that matter. Michaella smiled, and this time it was a full smile, the kind that transformed her entire face. Let me guess, music, coffee, and solitude. You forgot organization. How could I? Tripp took a step back, ready to return to his shop and the rest of the day, which hopefully would not include any more interactions with the irritatingly beautiful neighbor. Well, that was educational. Likewise, Michaella leaned on the doorframe. And just so you know, I am not going to stop making noise. It is literally my job. I am not going to stop complaining when it is too loud. Then we are going to be seeing a lot of each other. Unfortunately. I think so too. They stared at each other for 2 more seconds, and Tripp had the strange impression that he had just entered some kind of undeclared competition. He turned and walked back towards Spinning Stories, hearing the neighboring shop's door close behind him. When he entered his own shop, Bobby was sitting on the counter, as always, with a coffee and an expression that could only be described as mischievous. How long have you been here? Tripp asked, suspicious of the answer. Long enough. Bobby took a sip of his coffee, clearly savoring the moment. So, that is the new neighbor. Unfortunately. She is exactly the type of person you hate. Loud, disorganized, no respect for schedules. Thank you for the analysis. And also exactly the type of person you need. Bobby grinned. Beautiful, smart, not afraid to provoke you. I saw you looking at her like you forgot how words work for about 3 seconds. I did not forget anything. Yes, you did. Like when she shook your hand and you just stood there like a pole. Tripp walked past Bobby and went straight to the record player, needing to do something with his hands other than contemplating homicide. She is annoying. Annoying in a way that made you interested. It did not. Liar. Bobby. Tripp. Bobby got off the stool, still wearing that insufferable smile. Look, I understand emotional self-preservation. I really do. But that woman over there can clearly get under your skin, which is something no one has done in quite a while. And honestly, that is good. How is that good? Because it means you are still human. Bobby picked up his jacket. And humans, my friend, feel things, even when they do not want to. Tripp put a record on, letting the sound of Miles Davis fill the silence. I feel many things. Annoyance, for example, and attraction. Do not deny it, I saw it on your face. You see things that do not exist. I see things you are afraid to admit. Bobby went to the door, stopped, and turned. I bet $20 you two will end up arguing again before the end of the week. I am not going to bet because that is obvious. I bet 50 that one of those arguments will have sexual subtext. Bobby. 60 that you will think about her tonight before you fall asleep. Get out of here. Bobby, laughed and left, leaving Tripp alone with Miles Davis and extremely inconvenient thoughts about annoying neighbors with paint on their jawlines and smiles that looked like challenges. On the other side of the wall, Michaella closed the door and turned to Penelope and Grace, who were clearly waiting for some kind of explanation or confession. Do not even start, she said before either of them could speak. I did not say anything, Penelope replied, but her smile gave everything away. He is exactly how you described him, Grace added, taking the drill from Michaela's hands and placing it on the workbench. Methodical, stubborn, and with that, do not disturb energy. And also good-looking, Penelope finished. You forgot to mention that part. Michaella rolled her eyes and returned to the shelf she was installing before the interruption. I did not forget. It was just not relevant. Of course not. Penelope leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. That is why you stood there for 5 minutes arguing about schedules when you could have simply agreed to 8:30. I was negotiating. You were flirting. I was not. Yes, you were, Grace said gently. In that way we do when we are interested in someone but pretend we are not. Michaella took the drill back and positioned the shelf against the wall. You two have two fertile imaginations. This is the first time I have had contact with him. How could I be interested in someone I just met? And you have too fertile a denial it was love at first fight, Penelope retorted. I bet $20 you two will run into each other again this week. Of course we will. We are neighbors. I bet 40 that sparks will fly. There will be no sparks whatsoever. 50 that you will think about him tonight before you fall asleep. Michaella squeezed the drill trigger with brutal force, and the noise ended the conversation for a few blessed seconds. When she finished, she turned to Penelope with the most neutral expression she could muster. He is annoying, stubborn, and acts like he is 80 years old. And yet you noticed the color of his eyes, Grace observed. Brown. Everyone has brown eyes. Dark brown, Penelope corrected, with that sort of golden hue when the light hits them. And you definitely noticed. Michaella did not answer because, honestly, she did not have a good defense against the truth. Yes, she had noticed his eyes, and the way he stood there, all serious and methodical, complaining about noise as if it were a matter of national security, and the way his voice had that dry, almost cynical tone that made every sentence sound like a calculated provocation. And she also noticed that for one ridiculous second there in the doorway, when his hand touched hers, there was something like static electricity in the air. But that was completely irrelevant. Because she had a studio to set up, a life to rebuild, and zero interest in getting involved with a complicated neighbor who used sarcasm as a defense mechanism. Even if the sarcasm was kind of attractive, and the eyes too, and the way he stood there, all stubborn and… "Mish," Grace called, pulling her out of her own thoughts. "Are you okay?" "Perfectly." Michaella returned to work, determined to forget the whole conversation. "Now help me with this shelf before I decide to drill the wrong wall just for sport." The three of them returned to work, but the silence between them was charged with that kind of mutual knowledge that only close friends share. Knowledge that said, without words, that the conversation at the door had been only the beginning of something inevitably complicated, and probably fun, but mainly complicated. The Main Street Merchants Association meeting took place on a Tuesday evening at the small public library 3 blocks from Tripp's store. He did not want to be there. He had better things to do, like reorganizing the blues section or simply existing in silence. But attendance was mandatory according to the email the city hall had sent, and ignoring official summons never ended well in small towns. The room was full. Store owners, restaurant managers, the lady who sold flowers on the Edam corner, the couple who ran the bookstore. And because the universe clearly had a sense of humor, Michaella was sitting 3 chairs in front of him, talking to Grace about something that involved animated gestures and low laughter. Tripp adjusted his position in the uncomfortable chair and tried not to notice that she was wearing a dress that seemed ridiculously elegant for a community meeting, or that her hair was loose, falling in waves over her shoulders in a way that was definitely none of his business. Bobby, sitting next to him, leaned in and whispered, "You are looking at her again." "I am not." "Yes, you are. It is the 4th time in the last 10 minutes. I am looking forward. It is bad luck that she is directly in the way." "Uh-huh." Bobby raised his eyebrow. "And I was only born the most handsome man in this room by accident." Before Tripp could reply, the mayor stepped onto the small makeshift stage and asked for attention. Linda Carmichael was in her early 60s with short gray hair and the scary ability to make people agree with her without realizing they had agreed. "Good evening, everyone," she began, with that political smile that worked in small towns. "Thank you for your presence. I know it is Tuesday night and you all have better things to do." "True," someone muttered at the back of the room. Linda pretended not to hear. "But we are here because Harborview is about to receive an incredible opportunity. The state has approved a special grant for the revitalization of historic areas, and our Main Street has been selected." There was a general murmur of interest. Tripp crossed his arms, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. "The grant," Linda continued, "will be distributed among the merchants who actively participate in the project. This includes painting facades, improving sidewalks, installing decorative lighting, and organizing community events. But here is the detail. You will have to work in pairs." Tripp felt something akin to alarm run up his spine. Pairs, of course. Because working alone would be too inefficient. "The pairs," Linda proceeded, picking up a list, "will be formed by proximity. Direct neighbors will work together. This facilitates coordination and ensures the street has visual cohesion." Bobby turned to Tripp with a smile that could light up the entire room. "Direct neighbors. Like you and the renovation woman." "Shut up. This is going to be beautiful." Linda began reading the names. Spinning Stories and Revive and Redesign, Tripp Clark and Michaella Bennett. Michaella turned her head at the same moment Tripp looked forward, and their eyes met for a second, charged with the mutual recognition that this was a disaster waiting to happen. She raised an eyebrow. He narrowed his eyes. Bobby chuckled softly beside him. When the meeting ended, half an hour later, Tripp tried to leave quickly, but Linda intercepted him before he could reach the door. "Tripp, dear," she said with that maternal tone that did not accept refusals. "You and Michaella need to schedule a meeting to discuss the project." I am sure you will work wonderfully together. Linda, with all due respect, we barely know each other. Great, then this project will be a chance to build good neighborly relations. She patted his arm. And between us, the vinyl shop could use a new facade. The paint has been peeling since 2012. Before he could argue, Linda was already across the room talking to the coffee shop owner. Tripp sighed and turned to leave, almost bumping into Michaella, who apparently had the same idea of a quick getaway. "Excuse me," she said, but did not move. "You too," he replied, not moving. They stood there for 3 whole seconds, in a silent battle of who would move first. It was Grace who broke the deadlock, appearing next to Michaella with Penelope right behind her. "You two are going to have to learn to share space," Grace said, gentle but firm, starting with hallways. Tripp took a step to the side. Michaella did the same, in the same direction, and they almost collided again. She rolled her eyes. He sighed loudly, and finally she backed off, letting him pass. "Thank you," he said, sarcastic. "You are welcome," she replied in the same tone. Bobby appeared out of nowhere because apparently it was a night for everyone to decide to be inconvenient. "So, when are you meeting to discuss the project?" "Never if I have a choice," Tripp answered. "I fully agree," Michaella added, and it was the first thing they had agreed on since they met. "But you do not have a choice," Penelope reminded them, smiling. "Linda will follow up, and in a small town you do not ignore the mayor." "She has a point," Grace said. "Better resolve this soon." Tripp looked at Michaella. She looked back, clearly doing the same mental calculations about how much effort it would take to survive this without committing homicide. "Tomorrow morning," he said finally. 9 o'clock, at my shop. 8:30, she corrected. "At my studio." 9, at my shop. 8:45, studio. "Why do you always have to negotiate everything? Why do you always have to be right?" Bobby and Penelope exchanged a look that Tripp recognized as the universal look of, "This is going to be fun to watch." "Fine," Michaella said, grabbing her purse with a gesture that seemed slightly violent. 9 o'clock, vinyl shop, I will be there, and you will have coffee. I always have coffee. Good, because I am going to need caffeine to get through this meeting. The feeling is mutual. She turned and left, followed by Grace and Penelope, who could barely contain their laughter. Bobby patted Tripp on the back. "Man, you are terrible at hiding when someone makes you interested." "She does not make me interested. She makes me annoyed. It is the same thing, only with more sexual tension." "Bobby." "Tripp." Bobby started walking toward the parking lot. "Just admit she gets under your skin in a good way." "There is no good way to be gotten under my skin." "Yes, there is. It is called attraction." Tripp did not answer because, honestly, he did not have a good answer, and also because the annoying part of his brain, the one he wished he could turn off, kept replaying the way Michaella had stood there, in the hallway, stubborn and beautiful and completely inconvenient. The next morning, exactly at 9 o'clock, Michaella entered Spinning Stories carrying a folder, a notebook, and an expression that made it clear she would rather be anywhere else. Tripp was behind the counter, organizing receipts, and looked up when the doorbell chimed. "Punctual," he commented. "I know how clocks work." She placed the folder on the counter. "Do you have the coffee you promised?" He pointed to a mug, next to the coffee maker. "Help yourself, before I change my mind." Michaella poured the coffee, took a sip, and made an expression he could not decipher. "It is strong. It is coffee, not chamomile tea. I did not ask for a culinary critique, I was just observing." She pulled up a stool and sat down, opening her notebook. "So what exactly do we need to do?" Tripp picked up his own copy of the guidelines Linda had distributed. "Paint the facades, coordinate the colors, improve the sidewalk, and participate in at least 2 community events." Community events. Michaella wrote something down. "Like what?" "I do not know. Charity bazaar, craft fair, anything that makes Linda happy." "You are not a big fan of community events, are you?" "I am not a big fan of people in general." Michaella looked up, and there was something like amusement there. "That explains a lot." Explains what? The grumpy hermit vibe. I am not grumpy. You literally just said you do not like people. That does not make me grumpy, it makes me selective. Selective. She repeated the word as if testing the taste. Okay, we will use that version if it makes you feel better. Tripp closed the guidelines. Look, we do not have to like each other. We just need to finish this project without international incidents. Agreed. Michaella took another sip of coffee. So, colors. What color do you want for your facade? Gray. Gray. It is neutral. Classic. It is boring. Tripp took a deep breath. And what would be your suggestion? Blue, like deep navy blue with white trim. That is going to look like we are near the ocean. We are near the ocean. The town is called Harborview. It does not need to be literal. And you do not need to be so resistant to everything that has color. They stared at each other over the counter, and Tripp realized, with growing irritation, that she had a point. Not that he would ever admit it out loud. How about a grayish blue? How about a bluish gray? That is the same thing. It is not. One has more blue, the other has more gray. Working with you is a challenge. Michaella smiled, and it was a slow, teasing smile. Funny. I was going to say the same thing about you. Before he could reply, the door opened and Bobby walked in, immediately followed by Penelope and Grace. Tripp had the distinct feeling that this had been coordinated. Whoa, Bobby said, looking between the two of them. Did we interrupt something? An argument about colors, Michaella replied without taking her eyes off Tripp. He wants gray. I want blue. Blue wins, Penelope said immediately. Gray is what people with no imagination choose. Thanks for the support, Tripp muttered. Always. Bobby grabbed a cup and poured himself some coffee. Have you decided on the community events yet? We have not gotten to that part yet, Michaella said, turning a page in her notebook. We are stuck in the color phase. Classic, Grace commented, sitting on a chair near the window display. You two managed to turn any simple decision into a competition. It is not a competition, Tripp argued. It is a difference of opinion. That you are determined to win, Michaella added. I am not determined to win, I just recognize when I am right. Which is all the time, according to you. Not always, just most of the time. Bobby covered his face with his hand, but the laughter escaped. Anyway, Penelope and Grace did not even try to hide it, openly laughing at the argument. You two are like an old couple arguing about where to have lunch, Penelope said when she managed to stop laughing. The difference, Tripp replied, is that old couples eventually agree. We just frequently disagree. And with style, Michaella completed, but there was a sparkle in her eye now, something Tripp could not identify if it was irritation or amusement. Possibly both. The meeting stretched for another hour, with Bobby and Michaella's friends serving as unofficial mediators, whenever the conversation threatened to turn into a pitched battle over irrelevant details. In the end, they had a basic plan. Facades in shades of bluish-gray, improved sidewalks, and participation in an autumn fair that Linda was organizing for 6 weeks later. When everyone finally left, Tripp was alone in the store, looking at the notebook Michaella had forgotten on the counter. He picked it up, intending to leave it in her studio later, but ended up opening it to the first page. Her handwriting was firm, slanted, with notes on colors and measurements, and in the bottom corner, slightly hidden, she had drawn a quick caricature of him with a scowling expression and the caption, "Grumpy Vinyl Guy." Tripp felt something strange happen in his chest, not exactly anger, more like reluctant amusement. He tore out the page, folded it, and put it in his back pocket, deciding that this was future blackmail material. 3 days later, the painting began. Tripp hired a professional painter, but Michaella decided that she would do the studio herself because she had artistic vision and did not trust anyone to choose the right shades, which meant that on a sunny Saturday afternoon, she was on an aluminum ladder, painting the top of the facade while Tripp organized boxes of records on the sidewalk. He tried not to look. He really tried. But it was hard to ignore when she was right there, 10 feet away, wearing ripped jeans and an old paint-stained t-shirt, her hair in a ponytail, and an absurd concentration on her face as she brushed paint onto the wooden boards. "You are going to drill through that box from staring so hard," Bobby commented, appearing out of nowhere as always. Tripp blinked and realized that he had indeed been holding a box of records for too long without doing anything. "I was not staring." "Of course not. You were meditating in her direction. Do you not have anything else to do?" "I do, but watching you fight your own romantic interest is more entertaining." "There is no romantic interest." "Yes, there is. You are just too stubborn to admit it." Bobby waved at Michaella, who waved back distractedly before returning to her painting. "She is beautiful, smart, provokes you in a way that clearly drives you crazy." "Crazy is the right word. And you cannot stop looking at her. Dude, that is like the definition of attraction." Before Tripp could elaborate a sarcastic reply, a loud noise came from the direction of the ladder. He turned in time to see Michaella lose her balance, the paintbrush fly from her hand, and the paint can hang precariously on the edge of the step. Instinct overcame rational thought. Tripp dropped the box and ran, reaching the bottom of the ladder exactly as she managed to stabilize herself. But the paint can was not so lucky. It fell, spinning through the air in an almost cinematic way, and exploded on the ground between them in a wave of bluish gray. Paint splattered everywhere, on Tripp's jeans, on the ladder, on Michaella's face, on his shirt, on the freshly sanded wooden floor. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then Michaella began to climb down the ladder, slowly, with the expression of someone processing a series of very rapid emotions. When she reached the ground, she looked at the empty can, then at the disaster around them, then at Tripp. "That," she said calmly, "was your fault." "My fault?" Tripp looked at his own stained shirt. "I literally tried to help you. You distracted me. I was across the sidewalk. But you were looking." "I was not." "Yes, you were. And that distracted me. Therefore, your fault." Tripp opened his mouth to argue, but then he noticed she had paint on her nose, and on her left cheek, and a smear that ran from her ear to her neck, and the way she stood there, all splattered with blue, trying to maintain a serious expression while clearly wanting to laugh, was so absurd that he felt something give way inside his chest. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that took both of them by surprise. Michaella blinked. "Are you laughing? You have paint on your nose. You have paint everywhere. Your fault. Yours." They stared at each other, both covered in paint, surrounded by a bluish-gray disaster, and then Michaella started laughing too. The sound was light, genuine, and made something strange happen to his breathing. Bobby, who had watched everything from a safe distance, yelled from the sidewalk, "You look like characters from a badly made paint commercial." "Thanks for the observation," Michaella yelled back, still laughing. Tripp took off his stained shirt, leaving just the white t-shirt underneath, and extended his hand to her. "Come on, let's clean this up before it turns into concrete." Michaella looked at his hand for a second too long to be casual. Then she took it, and the touch was firm, calloused, still with remnants of damp paint on her fingers. Something passed between them in that moment. Not words, not teasing, but something quieter, and, in a way, scarier. She let go of his hand too quickly. "Thank you for trying to save me, even if you got in the way more than you helped. You are welcome, I think." He ran a hand through his hair, spreading more paint, without noticing. "But next time, maybe use a more stable ladder. Maybe you stop distracting me." "I was not distracting you." "Keep saying that. Maybe you will believe it." And there it was again. The teasing, the smile at the corner of her mouth, the way his eyes followed the movement without the conscious permission of his brain. Tripp realized he was closer than he needed to be, that he could smell paint mixed with something floral that must have been perfume or shampoo, and that he definitely needed to take a step back before he did something stupid. He took the step. She did the same. And the moment broke, fast and inevitable. "I will go get a bucket," she said, turning to go to the studio. "I will go get rags," he replied, turning to go to his shop. And as each walked away in the opposite direction, both with their hearts beating at a rhythm that made no sense for a simple paint can dropping, Bobby watched everything from the sidewalk with a smile that said exactly what he thought, that this was anything but simple, and that it was going to get interesting much faster than either of them was ready to admit. 4 weeks after the paint incident, Main Street was starting to look like a more polished version of itself. The facades were gaining coordinated colors, the sidewalks had been repaired, and the autumn fair was scheduled for 10 days later, which meant that Tripp and Michaella had spent the last few weeks in a state of forced coexistence that oscillated between mutual tolerance and the desire to commit petty crimes. That Monday morning, Tripp was reorganizing the classic rock section when he heard a dull thud coming from the studio next door, followed by a creative string of curses that would make a Marine sergeant blush. He stopped with the Led Zeppelin record still in his hand and considered his options. He could ignore it. He could pretend he did not hear it. Or he could go see if she had finally managed to kill herself trying to move the furniture alone. Conscience won out. He sighed, put the record back, and left through the front door, walking the 3 steps that separated the 2 shops. The studio door was ajar. He pushed it open and found Michaella trying, with no visible success, to drag an antique solid wood dresser that seemed to weigh more than a small car. She was wearing jeans and a gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and the expression of someone who was about to declare war against an inanimate object. "You know there are dollies with wheels for that, right?" Tripp said from the doorway. Michaella jumped, hitting her knee on the corner of the dresser. "Jesus Christ, do you pop up out of nowhere like some kind of annoying ghost?" "The door was open, and I can hear you cursing from California." "Great. So did you come to judge or to help?" Tripp walked in, closing the door. "It depends. Are you going to accept help or are you going to be stubborn and insist you can do it alone?" "I can do it alone." "Of course you can. That is why you have been here for 20 minutes trying to move. Something that clearly weighs about 80 kilograms. Michaella crossed her arms, but her defensive posture was undermined by the sweat stain on her forehead and the fact that she was clearly exhausted. "Fine, you can help, but no sarcastic comments. Where would be the fun in that?" "Tripp." "Michaella." He walked over to the dresser and assessed the weight. It was truly heavy. Oak wood, full drawers, probably from 1950-something. "Where do you want to take this?" "Over there." She pointed to the opposite corner of the room, near the window. "Why?" "Because the light is better, and because I want it there. Does that answer your question?" "Point taken." He raised his eyebrow. "Or is that expression also on the blacklist?" Michaella blinked. "What list?" "Forget it." Tripp positioned his hands on the side of the dresser. On 3, 1, 2. They lifted together. The furniture was heavy but manageable with 2 people, and Tripp felt his arm. Muscles protest as they crossed the room in synchronized and slightly uncoordinated steps. Michaella was on the other side. Her face was tense with the effort, and he noticed, because apparently his brain had decided to become inconvenient, that she had freckles on her nose. Small, almost invisible, but definitely there. "Are you looking or helping?" she asked without taking her eyes off their path. "I can do both." Impressive multitasking. I am full of hidden talents. They set the dresser down with a dull thud of wood against wood. Michaella took a step back, assessing the result, and Tripp did the same, creating a safe distance before his brain decided to notice more unnecessary things, like the way her t-shirt was slightly clinging to her back with sweat, or the way she bit her bottom lip when she was concentrating. "Perfect," she finally said. "Thank you." "You are welcome." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Next time, ask for help before you try to move. The Great Wall of China by yourself. I was going to ask eventually, when, after you got a hernia, Are you always this dramatic, or is it just with me? Just with you. You bring it out of me. Michaella turned to him, and there was something different in her gaze. Not annoyance, but something softer. Seriously, thank you. I know you do not have to keep coming over here to solve my problems. Technically, I came because you were making noise. Of course, the official excuse. It is not an excuse, it is a fact. If you say so. She walked to a table covered in tools and picked up a water bottle, drinking half of it in one go. When she lowered the bottle, there was a drop running down the corner of her mouth, and Tripp looked away before he could do something stupid like follow its path with his eyes. Do you want some? She offered, extending the bottle. He looked at the bottle, at her face, back at the bottle. There was something strangely intimate about drinking from the same bottle, and he could not explain why that felt important. I have water at the shop. It is pretty far away, like 3 steps. 3 steps? Wow, an odyssey. Maybe I will need a compass. Michaella rolled her eyes but was smiling. You are ridiculous, and you are stubborn. We already established that weeks ago. Tripp was about to answer when the door opened and Grace walked in carrying a box of donuts and 2 cups of coffee. She stopped when she saw the 2 of them, looked at the recently moved dresser, then back at them with an expression that made it clear she had reached interesting conclusions. Hi, she said, with that sweet tone that hid a sharp perception. Did I interrupt something? Tripp was helping with the dresser, Michaella explained too quickly. How kind. Grace placed the box on the table. And here I was thinking you were still in the hostile tolerance phase. We still are, Tripp replied. This was a temporary exception. Of course, an exception. Grace opened the box of donuts. Do you want one? Or do you need to rush back to the shop before someone thinks you are friends? Michaella laughed, and Tripp felt something strange happen to the rhythm of his own breathing. He took a donut just to avoid seeming rude, and also because avoiding Grace when she was being sweet was impossible. Thanks, he said, taking a bite. Sugar and chocolate flooded his mouth, and he had to admit it was worth staying 5 more minutes. So, Grace began, picking up a donut with the delicacy of someone who was about to ask invasive questions. Have you 2 decided what you are going to do at the fair yet? Not yet, Michaella replied. We are kind of avoiding the topic. Solid strategy, Tripp commented. Procrastination works until it doesn't anymore. Until it does not anymore, Grace repeated. The fair is 10 days from now. Maybe it is time to have a real plan. A real plan involves joint decisions, Tripp said, and we are terrible at that. We are not terrible, Michaella argued. We are selectively incompatible. That is not a real thing. Yes, it is. It means we disagree on absolutely everything. Exactly. Grace shook her head, clearly amused. You 2 are like a 50-year marriage condensed into 6 weeks. Without the marriage part, Tripp said too quickly. Obviously, Michaella added in the same rushed tone. Grace smiled in that way that meant she knew something they were still denying. Of course, obviously. So how about the fair? You 2 could set up a combined booth, vintage vinyl and restored furniture, like the complete retro aesthetic. Michaella paused, the donut halfway to her mouth. That is actually not a terrible idea. Thanks for the surprise in your voice, Grace replied. It could work, Tripp admitted, considering, if we coordinated properly. Big if, Michaella murmured, but there was genuine interest in her tone now. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing logistics, with Grace serving as mediator whenever the conversation threatened to turn into a debate about irrelevant details. When Tripp finally returned to the shop, he had a mental list of things to organize and a strange feeling that he had just agreed to something that would probably make his life more complicated. Bobby was waiting at the counter, as usual, with coffee and an expression that foreshadowed convenient comments. You spent 40 minutes in there, he said bluntly. I was helping. With what? Interior decorating? With a dresser and fair planning. 40 minutes to move 1 piece of furniture. Bobby took a sip of his coffee, savoring the moment. You must be losing your touch, old man. The dresser was heavy. I am sure it was. Bobby's smile was pure mischief. And how long did the fair planning take? 35 minutes? More or less. You know you could have done that over email, right? Email does not have the same efficiency. Efficiency. Bobby repeated the word as if testing its weight. Is that the excuse you are going with? Tripp organized some records without looking at him. It is not an excuse, it is logistics. Right, and the fact that you always come back looking like a teenager who just talked to his crush is also logistics? I do not look like anything. You are smiling right now. No, I am not. Yes, you are. And you have also run your hand through your hair like 4 times since you got back, which is your classic nervous tell. Tripp stopped, realized he was indeed making the gesture, and forced his hand back to his side. You should find a hobby. I have a hobby. It is called watching you fight obvious feelings. Bobby got up from the stool. But seriously, man, you like her, and that is okay. She is cool, she provokes you in a good way, and she is clearly not afraid of you. That does not mean anything. It means everything. You spent 5 years avoiding any woman who showed interest, and then this one shows up, who annoys and fascinates you in equal measure, and suddenly you are spending 40 minutes helping move furniture. Bobby walked to the door, stopped, and turned. Just do not let fear ruin something that could be good. He left before Tripp could reply, leaving the silence of the shop filled only by Chet Baker on the record player and inconvenient. Thoughts about neighbors who wore gray t-shirts and had freckles on their noses. 2 days later, on Wednesday afternoon, Michaella appeared at the shop with a toolbox and a determined expression. I came to help you, she announced, placing the box on the counter. Tripp looked up from the inventory spreadsheet. With what? With that broken shelf. She pointed to the back wall, where a wooden shelf was hanging at a worrisome angle. I saw it yesterday when I came to get the booth. Measurements. It is practically begging to fall. I know, it has been on the to-fix list for 3 months. And when are you going to do it? When it falls on someone's head? I was going to call someone. Or, Michaella opened the toolbox. You can let me fix it now, for free, as a thank you for the dresser. Tripp considered. The shelf really needed repair, and he truly had procrastinated because hiring someone involved calling, scheduling, and dealing with people. Fine, but if you mess it up, you pay. I am not going to mess it up. I do this professionally. You restore antique furniture. You do not necessarily fix shelves. It is literally the same skill set. She picked up a screwdriver and walked over to the shelf. Now stop questioning me and hold this when I ask you to. Tripp set the spreadsheet aside and went over to her, watching as Michaella assessed the damage with a professional eye. She touched the wood, tested the screws, shook her head, and muttered something about amateur installation and whoever did this should be sued. You need new screws, she said, turning to him, and maybe a better anchor. Is there a hardware store nearby? 2 streets down. Great. You go get them while I take this down. You are ordering me around in my own store? I am, and you are going to do it because you know I am right. She held out her hand. The red box. Quick. He placed the box in her hand. If you destroy my store while I am gone, I will. You will what? Complain politely? Give me a lecture on responsibility? She was smiling now, teasingly. Go, Tripp. I promise not to set anything on fire. He walked out muttering about bossy neighbors and women who did not know how to accept help without returning the favor. When he returned 20 minutes later, carrying a bag of screws and anchors, he found Michaella in the middle of the store, surrounded by records scattered on the floor and the shelf completely disassembled. What did you do? He asked, genuinely alarmed. Relax, I needed to take everything out to fix it properly. She was sitting on the floor with a smudge of dust on her face. Hand me the screws. Tripp handed over the bag and crouched down beside her, starting to pick up the records. There was something strangely domestic about the whole scene. Them there on the shop floor, surrounded by vinyl and tools, working in silence punctuated only by Miles Davis on the record. Player and the occasional sound of metal against wood. "You know this is going to take about 2 hours, right?" Michaella said, tightening the first new screw. "I am not in a rush. No customers waiting? It is Wednesday afternoon. Traffic is like 3 people an hour. Exciting life. Exactly how I like it." Michaella stopped what she was doing and looked at him with something like genuine curiosity. "Do you really like this? The quiet life, the predictable routine?" "Yes," he did not hesitate. "Why? Do you think it is weird?" "Not weird, just different. I have always been more the type that needs constant change, not to go crazy." "And how is that working out for you?" "Honestly," she went back to working on the shelf. "Better than I expected. Harborview is the opposite of everything I knew, but there is something comforting about knowing tomorrow will be basically the same as today." "You just described my entire life." "I know. That is why it is ironic that we get along so poorly." "We do not get along that poorly." Michaella looked up, surprised. "We do not?" "No." Tripp put the last record back on the pile. "We tease each other. It is different." "Teasing as a prelude to friendship? Or as a functional substitute?" "Romantic. Romance is not my department." "I noticed." She tightened another screw, and there was something different in her tone now. Lighter, but also more thoughtful. "Have you ever tried? Romance, I mean." Tripp paused. It was a personal question disguised as casual conversation, and he could deflect or he could be honest. "Once. It did not end well." "Marriage?" "Yes, we were together for almost 6 years. I have been divorced for 5. "Ah." Michaella did not seem surprised. "That explains a few things." "Explains what?" "The aversion to commitment, the cynicism about relationships, the way you act like you have an invisible wall around you." "I do not have a wall." "Yes, you do. It is an emotional wall with a do not cross sign." She stopped working and turned fully toward him. "But sometimes you let someone step through for 2 seconds before kicking them out again." Tripp did not know what to do with that observation. It was too accurate, too invasive, and also kind of true. "And you, what is your excuse for being so stubborn and provocative?" "Defense mechanism," she answered without hesitation. "If I annoy people first, they do not get close enough to hurt me. Later? That is pathetic, I know. I was going to say honest." They stared at each other for a long moment, and there was something different in the air now. Something heavier, more real. Tripp felt his pulse quicken for no apparent reason, and realized he was too close that he could see the color nuances in her eyes. The shop door opened with the bell ringing too loudly, breaking the moment. Bobby walked in, stopped when he saw the two of them on the floor surrounded by tools, and smiled in that way that meant he would never let Tripp forget this. "Whoa," he said, clearly amused. "Am I interrupting something?" "Renovations," Michaella replied, returning her attention to the shelf. "Nothing much." "Right, renovations." Bobby walked over to the counter. "On the floor, with tools. Very professional." "Bobby," Tripp warned. "Tripp," Bobby mimicked the tone. "I just came to pick up that record you set aside, but I can come back later if you need privacy." "We do not need privacy," Tripp and Michaella said at the same time, then exchanged an irritated look for synchronizing. Bobby picked up the record, still smiling. "You know you are ridiculously obvious, right?" "Obvious about what?" Michaella asked. "About nothing," Tripp replied too quickly. "About the unresolved sexual tension," Bobby completed, because apparently he had decided his life was a sitcom. "But it is fine. You will figure it out eventually, or you will keep denying it, until you implode. Both work." He left before either of them could respond, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Michaella returned to working on the shelf with renewed intensity, and Tripp stood there trying to decide whether to address the comment or pretend it did not happen. "Is he always like that?" Michaella asked without looking up. "Unbearable? Yes. Good to know it is not just me who thinks so." They finished the shelf in silence, but it was a different silence now, charged, full of unsaid things. When Michaella tightened the last screw and tested the structure, it was almost 5 in the afternoon, and the sunlight was streaming through the windows at a golden angle that made everything look softer. "Done," she said, getting up from the floor and wiping her hands on her jeans. "Stronger than before. It will not fall even if you hang your entire Led Zeppelin collection on it." "Thank you." Tripp stood up too, aware that he was again too close. "You did not have to do that. I know, but I wanted to." She picked up the toolbox. "And now we are even, no outstanding debts. Technically, I still owe you for the donuts I ate at your studio. Those were Grace's. But you offered them. Then you owe Grace." Michaella laughed, and the sound made something strange happen to the rhythm of his breathing. "You are impossible to have a normal conversation with. Normal is overrated." "I agree." She walked toward the door, stopped, and turned. "By the way, you have paint in your hair. From the renovation weeks ago, it is still there." Tripp ran a hand through his hair automatically. "Seriously?" "No, but you are easy to tease." She opened the door, still smiling. "See you tomorrow, neighbor." And she left, leaving Tripp alone with Miles Davis, a newly fixed shelf, and the growing and extremely inconvenient feeling that Bobby had been right about practically everything. The next night, Tripp was closing the shop when he saw through the window. Michaella was across the street, talking to a tall, bearded guy whom Tripp vaguely recognized as the owner of the new coffee shop that had opened 2 months ago. They were laughing, her arms crossed but her body language open, him leaning slightly toward her in the way men do when they are interested. Tripp looked away, annoyed with himself for paying attention. It was none of his business. She could talk to whoever she wanted, flirt with whoever she wanted. She was a single adult woman, and he had no right to have opinions about it. Except he did have opinions. Several. All inconvenient. He forced his attention back to the cash register, closing out the day, but the corner of his eye kept drifting toward the window. The guy said something that made Michaella laugh again, that genuine laugh that transformed her entire face, and Tripp felt something unpleasant and primitive twist in his chest. Jealousy. This was jealousy. Ridiculous, irrational, completely unjustified jealousy. He closed the register with force and went straight to the back door, heading up to his apartment before he could do something stupid like go outside and interrupt a conversation that was definitely not his problem. Bobby called 10 minutes later. "Did you see?" he asked bluntly. "See what?" "Michaella talking to Alex from the coffee shop." "No." "A lie." "And why would I see?" "Because you watch that street like a hyper-protective hawk." Bobby paused. He asked for her number. Something cold went down Tripp's spine. So what? So she gave it to him. Good for her. She is an adult. She can do whatever she wants. You are jealous. I am not. Yes, you are. I hear it in your voice. You hear what you want to hear. And you deny what is obvious to anyone with functional eyes. Bobby sighed. Man, you like her. Do something about it before someone else does. I am not going to do anything. Why? Because Tripp stopped, trying to formulate an answer that made sense. Because it does not make sense. We are completely different. We argue about everything, and I do not want to complicate a situation that is already complicated. Translation, you are scared. I am not scared. Yes, you are, in the same way you have been scared for 5 years. But here is an inconvenient truth. Fear does not protect anyone. It just leaves you alone. Bobby hung up before Tripp could reply, leaving the silence of the apartment filled only by the distant sound of the ocean and thoughts he definitely did not want to be having. In the studio on the other side of the wall, Michaella put away the tools and tried not to think about the fact that she had given Alex her number, even though she knew she probably would not answer when he called. He was nice, handsome, clearly interested. Exactly the type of guy she should be interested in. Except she was not. "Did you give the coffee shop guy your number?" Penelope asked from the doorway, where she had appeared with Grace, both carrying wine and that expression that meant they were going to ask invasive questions. "I did," Michaella confirmed, taking the glass Penelope offered. "And are you going out with him?" Grace asked, sitting on a chair. "Probably not." "Why?" Penelope sat on the table. "He is cute. He has his own business. He is not crazy." "I know." "Then what is the problem?" Michaella took a long sip of wine before answering. "He is not interesting." "Interesting," Grace repeated, and there was knowledge in her tone. "As in, he does not provoke you in the right way?" "As in, he does not provoke me at all." "But the grumpy neighbor from the record shop does," Penelope completed, smiling. "Interesting." "I did not say that." "You did not have to." Grace tilted her head. "You smile differently when you talk about him, and when he helped with the dresser this week, you spent 7 minutes telling me how stubborn and methodical he is, which is the universal code for, I like him, but I'm not going to admit it. I do not like him." "Then why did you spend 3 hours fixing his shelf yesterday?" "Because he helped me with the dresser. It was fair." "Or because you look for excuses to spend time with him," Penelope suggested. Michaella rolled her eyes but could not convincingly deny it. Because the truth, which she had been trying to ignore for weeks, was that yes, she looked for excuses. She showed up at the shop more than she needed to. She prolonged conversations that could have ended in 3 minutes, and she thought about him with a frequency that bordered on the ridiculous for someone who theoretically annoyed her. "He is not interested," she finally said. "And even if he were, we are like oil and water." "Oil and water that clearly have chemistry," Grace corrected gently. "You just need to stop fighting it." "There is nothing to stop fighting." "Keep telling yourself that," Penelope murmured. "Eventually you will believe it." But as they drank wine and talked about other things, Michaella knew she would not believe it. Because every time Tripp looked at her that way, half annoyed, half fascinated, something happened in her chest that had no name but had weight. And even if he never did anything about it, even if she never did anything about it, that feeling was not simply going to disappear just because it was inconvenient. Some things were inevitable, and Michaella was starting to suspect that Tripp Clark was one of them. The Harborview Fall Fair happened every year on the 3rd week of October, turning Main Street into an over-decorated version of itself, with orange streamers, artisan booths, and the omnipresent scent of cinnamon and baked apples hanging in the air. Tripp hated events like this. Too many people, too much noise, too much expectation of forced social interaction. But he had agreed, so there he was, arranging boxes of vintage vinyl on a table shared with Michaella's restored furniture, trying not to notice that she was wearing that mustard yellow dress which made her eyes look more green than gray. The booth was located in the center of the street, strategically positioned by Mayor Linda to maximize visibility. Michaella had insisted on decorating with small pumpkins and white LED lights, and Tripp had complained on principle, but secretly thought it looked nice. Not that he would ever admit that out loud. "Can you stop organizing the records alphabetically?" Michaella said from the other end of the table, where she was adjusting an antique mirror with a gilded frame. "You've done it 3 times already." "People mess things up. I reorganize." "No one has messed anything up yet. The fair only started 20 minutes ago. Prevention is better than correction. Or you just like having control over small things because the big ones scare you." She looked at him with that provocative expression that had become all too familiar over the past few weeks. Psychological analysis was not included in the shared booth package. It came as a bonus. Bobby appeared out of nowhere, as usual, with a cone of pink cotton candy and an expression of pure, malicious glee. "Are you two fighting already? The fair has barely started." "We are not fighting," Tripp corrected. "We are having creative differences. Over the alphabetical order of records, Michaella added. Deep and relevant subject matter. Crucial, Bobby agreed, biting into the cotton candy. And speaking of relevance, I saw Alex from the coffee shop asking about you, Mish. Tripp did not look up, but his hands tensed around the Fleetwood Mac record he was holding. Michaella, to her credit, merely shrugged. Cool. Cool. Bobby arched an eyebrow. He is clearly interested. He came by like twice just to check out the booth. Good for him. Aren't you going to talk to him? Bobby, Tripp interrupted, more sharply than he intended. Don't you have somewhere else to be? Bobby smiled because he had clearly gotten the reaction he wanted. Plenty of places, but none of them are as fun as here. He waved and walked away, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Michaella went back to adjusting the mirror, but there was something different in her posture now. More tense. You do not need to get annoyed just because someone mentioned a guy is interested in me. I am not annoyed. Yes, you are. Your ears turn red when you're annoyed. Tripp automatically reached for his ear, realized what he had done, and quickly dropped his hand. That is ridiculous. It is an observation. She crossed her arms. And it is also ridiculous for you to act as if I cannot talk to other people. I did not act like anything. You practically chased Bobby away from here. He was being bothersome. He is always being bothersome. You only got bothered because he mentioned Alex. I was not bothered. Your ears are still red. Before Tripp could respond, an elderly couple approached the booth, interested in the jazz records. He forced a professional smile and spent the next 10 minutes explaining the difference between original pressings and reissues, while Michaella helped a woman choose between two restored chairs. When the customers finally left, the tension had increased instead of dissipating. Look, Michaella said, returning to the end of the table where he stood. If you have some issue with Alex, I have no issue with him at all. Then why do you act like you do? I am not acting like anything. You are projecting. Projecting. She repeated the word with that tone that meant she was about to say something cutting. You project indifference when you clearly care about things? I do not project anything. Of course you do. You spend all your days pretending that nothing affects you, that you are perfectly satisfied with your solitary organized life, but anyone with functioning eyes can see that's a lie. Tripp felt something hot climb his neck. You do not know anything about me. I know more than you think. Michaella took a step forward, and there was fire in her gaze now. I know you use sarcasm as a shield. I know you have organized your entire life in a way that no one can get close enough to hurt you again. And I know you are afraid to admit that maybe, after 5 years, you might want something different. You are making assumptions. Based on what? 3 months of forced proximity? 3 months of observing you. She did not back down. 3 months of conversations where you let things slip without realizing it. 3 months of realizing that you are not as indifferent as you pretend to be. About what exactly am I not indifferent? The question came out more aggressive than he planned, but Michaella was not intimidated. If anything, she raised her chin in that stubborn gesture he had learned to recognize. About me. The words came out firm, challenging. You are not indifferent about me, and I am not indifferent about you. And we have spent 3 months pretending this entire tension is just annoyance when we both know it is not. Tripp stood still, his heart beating at a rhythm that made no sense for a conversation in the middle of a public fair. There were people passing by, music playing from somewhere, the sound of laughter and conversations. But everything seemed distant compared to the weight of her words. You do not know what you are saying, he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, I do. And you know it too. You are just too afraid to admit it. I am not afraid. Yes, you are. Michaella took another step, and now she was too close, invading his personal space in a way that made his breathing uneven. You are afraid that if you admit you feel something, it will go wrong again. But here is a newsflash. Fear does not protect you from anything, just leaves you alone. It was the same thing Bobby had said weeks ago, but coming from her, It carried a different weight, more personal, more true. "And what about you?" Tripp asked, hearing his own voice come out lower, more intense. "You use provocation and sarcasm the same way I use distance, so do not pretend you are different." "I do not pretend to be different. I know exactly what I am doing." She did not break eye contact. "The difference is that I am willing to admit it. You are the one who keeps denying it." "Admit what?" "That you want me around. That you think about me when you shouldn't. That every time we touch, even if it is just by accident, you feel something that scares you." Tripp opened his mouth to deny it, but the words did not come. Because she was right. Completely, annoyingly, inconveniently right. He thought about her when he should be thinking about inventory. He sought out excuses to walk past the studio. He felt something strange and electric every time she came into the shop. And yes, he was afraid of all of it because the last time he had allowed himself to feel something like this, it had ended in wreckage. "I cannot," he finally said, and it was the most honest thing he had said in months. "I do not know how to do this again." Michaella took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its aggressiveness, becoming softer. "No one does. We just try." Before Tripp could respond, a familiar voice cut through the moment. "Michaella!" It was Alex walking toward them with a friendly smile and completely oblivious to the terrible timing. "I thought I had lost you in the crowd." Michaella turned and Tripp saw the transformation on her face, the intensity of seconds ago replaced by cordial politeness. "Hi, Alex. I was wondering if you wanted to take a walk." Alex vaguely gestured toward the street. "See the rest of the fair. Maybe grab a bite to eat." Tripp felt something like acid in his throat. He watched Michaella hesitate, look quickly at him as if expecting some reaction, and then she made a decision that was clearly more about pride than actual desire. "Sure," she said. "Let me just let Grace know I will be out for a few minutes." Alex smiled, clearly satisfied, and Michaella walked over to where Grace and Penelope were at a nearby booth. Tripp stood there watching her walk away and felt Bobby appear beside him. "You are an idiot," Bobby said, bluntly. "Thank you for the observation. She literally gave you a perfect opening, and you let her walk off with another guy. She is free to do whatever she wants. Of course she is, but you are also free to stop being a coward and admit what everyone else already knows." Bobby shook his head. "You like her, she likes you, and you are both wasting time because of pride and fear." Tripp did not respond because he did not have a good one. He watched Michaella return, past the booth without looking at him, and leave with Alex toward the other stalls. And every step she took away seemed to confirm what Bobby had said, that he was, in fact, an idiot. The next 2 hours were torture. Tripp stayed at the booth, serving customers with automatic efficiency while his mind was elsewhere. He saw Michaella occasionally, laughing at something Alex said, sampling food, looking at crafts, and every time he saw her, something uncomfortable churned in his chest. Grace eventually showed up to take over the booth, giving him a break he hadn't asked for, but which she insisted he needed. "Go after her," Grace said, gently but firmly, "before you regret it. She is with someone else. She is spending time with someone because you did not give her a reason not to." Grace gently pushed him. "Go, and this time, be honest." Tripp walked through the fair, past booths of crafts, food, and live music. He found Bobby, who pointed toward the games area near the end of the street. When he got there, he saw Michaella alone, sitting on a wooden bench holding a cup of cider and watching the commotion with a thoughtful expression. He stopped a few feet away, watching her for a moment. The mustard-yellow dress moved lightly in the breeze, her loose hair falling over her shoulders. And there was something about that moment, about that image of her alone in the middle of the chaos, that made something give way inside him. He walked up to the bench. "Where is Alex?" Michaella looked up, surprised. He had to go back to the coffee shop. There was an emergency with an employee. "Oh." Tripp stood still, indecisive. "Can I sit down?" "The bench is public." He sat down, leaving a space between them that felt both too much and not enough. They were silent for a few seconds, listening to the distant music and the murmur of conversations. "You were right," Tripp finally said, looking straight ahead. "About everything you said." Michaella turned her head, but he continued before she could respond. "I use distance as protection, and organization as control. And yes, I am afraid to care about someone again because last time, I destroyed everything." He took a deep breath. "But the part you got wrong is that I do not care. I have cared for weeks, and that terrifies me." There was a long silence. Then Michaella placed the cup of cider on the ground and turned completely toward him. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I do not know how to do this without ruining everything." The honesty came out easier than he expected. "Because you are exactly the type of person I swore I would never get involved with again. Intense, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. And because every time you walk into the shop or appear out of nowhere, or tease me about something ridiculous, I forget every reason I built to keep myself distant." Michaella did not respond immediately. When she spoke, her voice was lower, more vulnerable. "I sent Alex away." "What?" "Before the emergency, I made up an excuse that I had to return to the booth." She looked down at her lap. "Because spending time with him only made me realize I did not want to be with him. I wanted to be with you, even though you are stubborn and annoying and emotionally inaccessible most of the time." Something expanded in Tripp's chest, warm, frightening, and inevitable. "I am not emotionally inaccessible." "Yes, you are. But I kind of like that about you." She finally looked at him. "Because when you let someone in, even if it is only for 2 seconds, it is real. No masks, no games. And I want more of those moments. I want you to stop fighting something we both know is going to happen anyway. It is not fear of getting it wrong. It is fear of what you do to me. And I can handle that." Michaella reached out a hesitant hand and touched his cheek. The touch was light, almost experimental, but it ignited something beneath Tripp's skin, sparking an instinct he had been smothering for years. "You do not need to have all the answers now. You just need to stop running." Tripp closed his hand over hers, holding it firmly against his own face, as if that touch was the first true thing he had felt in a long time. He took a deep breath, locking his gaze with hers. "I am not running from you," he murmured, but his voice betrayed the conflict. "Yes, you are," she replied without pulling her hand away. "And you know it." That was enough. He moved first. Suddenly, decisively, without asking permission, his hand slid from hers to the back of her neck, pulling her firmly closer to him, as if he were tired of waiting for his own fear to pass. "Michaella!" His voice came out hoarse, too hot. "If I start," she whispered. "I can take it." He could not think anymore. Tripp tilted his head and kissed her, not like someone who is trying, but like someone who is finally yielding. The kiss came hot, urgent yet still careful, as if he were learning her taste in pieces. She sighed against his mouth, and he responded by deepening the kiss, his thumb brushing her jawline, as if he wanted to memorize everything at once. "You," he murmured between kisses, his warm breath grazing her lips, "are going to be my undoing." "Or your salvation," she said, catching his lower lip with a controlled smile. He held his breath. "Do not provoke me," she warned, kissing her again, deeper, firmer, his hand on her waist anchoring them both in the same place. "Why?" she countered, her mouth still pressed against his. "Do you lose control?" "With you." He pulled her closer, his face pressed to hers, their breaths mingled. "Always." And then the kissing continued, now inevitable, now theirs, now with no turning back. Michaella ran her hands through his hair, lightly scratching the back of his neck, and he felt a shiver run down his entire spine. The world around them disappeared. There was no fair, no noise, no people, only the two of them on the wooden bench, discovering that 3 months of provocation and denial had been a prelude to this. When they finally separated, their breaths ragged, their foreheads touching, both remained silent. Tripp's heart was pounding so hard. His hands were still on her face, his thumbs almost unconsciously stroking her cheeks. "That was," Michaella began, but did not finish. "Yes," Tripp agreed, even without knowing what she was going to say. They slowly, reluctantly pulled away and sat there, looking at each other as if seeing for the first time. Her yellow dress was slightly wrinkled where he had held it, and there was something different in the air between them now. Something resolved and at the same time new. "We should probably get back to the booth," Michaella said, but did not move. "Probably," Tripp agreed, also without moving. "People are going to notice we disappeared together. Bobby has certainly noticed already. Penelope and Grace too. They will ask annoying questions, and Bobby will make sarcastic comments." Michaella smiled, slow and genuine. "Are you ready for that?" "No." Tripp ran his thumb over her lower lip, fascinated by its softness. "But I do not think it matters." "It doesn't?" "No." He pulled her back, kissing her again, shorter this time but no less intense. "Because I spent 3 months trying not to do that. And now that I have, I cannot remember why I was so reluctant." Michaella laughed against his mouth, the sound vibrating between them. "You are just as bad at romance as I imagined." "Thank you." "You are welcome." She kissed him one more time, quickly, and then stood up, extending her hand. "Come on, before Grace sells half your records for ridiculous prices." Tripp took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and stood up as well. They walked back through the fair, side by side, holding hands, and every person who passed them seemed to notice. Some smiled, others whispered. Mayor Linda Carmichael waved with obvious approval from a cake stall. When they reached the booth, Bobby, Penelope, and Grace were all there, chatting as if they were not clearly waiting for the two of them to return. "Well, well," Bobby said with the widest smile Tripp had ever seen. "Look who finally decided to show up." "You took your time," Penelope added, her eyes sparkling. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," Michaella replied, squeezing Tripp's hand. Grace looked between the two, noticed their clasped hands, and smiled in that way she had. "Finally." "Finally what?" Tripp asked, even though he knew the answer. "You stopped being stubborn," Bobby answered. "It took a while, but you got there." "We were not stubborn," Michaella argued. "Yes, you were," all three said at the same time. Tripp and Michaella exchanged a look and then started to laugh. Because it was true. They had been ridiculously stubborn, denying the obvious, fighting against something inevitable. And now that they had finally stopped fighting, everything felt simultaneously terrifying and right. "Fine," Tripp admitted. "Maybe we were a little stubborn." "A little?" Bobby arched an eyebrow. "Okay, very stubborn." "Thank you for the honesty." Bobby patted him on the back. "Now about the $20 you owe me from the bet." "What bet?" "The one I made weeks ago about when you two would finally admit you liked each other." Michaella looked at Penelope and Grace. "Did you two bet too?" "Obviously," Penelope replied without remorse. "And I won. I said it would be at the fair." "I said it would be earlier," Grace admitted. "I lost by a week." Tripp shook his head, but he was smiling. Because despite the inconvenience, the fear, and all the reasons why this was a bad idea, he was here. Holding Michaella Bennett's hand in the middle of a fall, fair in Harbor View, surrounded by friends who had clearly noticed the obvious before they did. And for the first time in 5 years, he was not afraid of what came next. He was just curious, and perhaps even a little hopeful. The next morning arrived with the kind of golden light that made Harborview look like a postcard. Tripp woke before his alarm, which was rare, and spent the first 5 minutes staring at the ceiling trying to process the fact that he had indeed kissed Michaella Bennett in the middle of a public fair yesterday. Twice, possibly 3 times, depending on whether that quick kiss before she got into Grace's car counted. He grabbed his phone. 7 messages from Bobby, all variations of the, same theme finally, and I told you so. 1 message from Michaella sent at 11 at night. You go to sleep too early for someone who just started something new. Good night, grumpy neighbor. Tripp smiled at his phone like an idiotic teenager, realized what he was doing and set it back on the nightstand. This was new, uncharted territory, and he needed coffee before attempting to navigate anything involving feelings admitted out loud. When he went downstairs to the shop half an hour later, reasonably prepared for the day, he found Michaella sitting on the atelier doorstep with 2 cups of coffee in hand, and that smile that made his brain forget how words worked. "I thought you would sleep in," she said, extending one of the cups. "Considering yesterday was a long day, I always wake up early." He took the coffee, noticing she had added the exact amount of sugar he preferred without him asking. "You memorized how I like my coffee. I observe everything." She took a sip. "3 weeks ago, you complained that the association meeting coffee was too bitter. I figured you used sugar. That is slightly stalker behavior. Or attention. Depends on the perspective." Tripp sat beside her on the step, leaving a small space between them that she immediately closed, leaning her shoulder against his. The touch was casual but full of intent, and he felt something warm spread down his arm. "So," Michaella began after a moment, "are we going to talk about yesterday or pretend it was a temporary lapse of sanity?" "Talk, probably." Tripp turned his head to look at her. "Considering Bobby is going to torture me to death if I try to pretend it did not happen. Penelope and Grace have already sent about 50 messages in the group asking for details. Which you did not give, I hope. Obviously not." She smiled. "I may have said you kiss better than I expected." Tripp nearly spit out his coffee. "You said what? Relax." "I am joking." She nudged him lightly with her elbow. "I said we would talk today about what this means. And what does it mean? Are you asking me or are we asking each other?" "Both." Michaella set her cup on the ground and turned fully toward him, crossing her legs. "All right, let us be mature adults and have an honest conversation about expectations and intentions. That sounds terrifying." "It is a little." She took a deep breath, "but necessary. Because I do not want us stuck in that strange limbo where no one knows what is going on." Tripp set his cup beside hers and mirrored her posture, shifting to face her directly. "All right, radical honesty. You first? Why me first? Because ladies first. It is chivalry." Michaella laughed, but there was a trace of nerves in the sound. "All right. Radical honesty." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I like you. More than I should, considering you annoy me half the time. And I want to try something real. I do not know exactly what that means, but I know I do not want yesterday to have been just an isolated moment." Tripp felt something expand in his chest, the same feeling as yesterday but stronger now in the daylight, without the adrenaline of the fair. "Your turn to be honest. I like you too." The words came easier than he expected, "and I also want to try. But I need you to know I am terrible at this. At relationships, I mean. I tend to shut down when I get uncomfortable, and I overorganize things to compensate when I feel like I am losing control. I know. I watched you do that these past weeks, and that does not bother you. It bothers me." She lifted a shoulder. "But everyone has flaws. Mine include being stubborn, provocative, sarcastic, and incapable of leaving things alone when I should. I have noticed that too. So we are aware of each other's problems." Michaella reached out, touching his face. "And we still want to try. Still want to." He covered her hand with his own, but slowly. "No rush. No unrealistic expectations. Agreed. And with communication. If something is bothering us, we talk. And no unnecessary drama. Obviously, I hate drama." "Same here." They looked at each other for a moment, and then Michaella smiled in that way that lit up her entire face. "Look at us, being functional adults having a mature conversation. Impressive for 2 people who spent 3 months arguing about noise and paint colors and record organization, and practically everything. He leaned in, kissing her softly, different from the intensity of yesterday. It was a calm kiss, promising, one that said we have time. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. So, grumpy boyfriend, what is the plan for the rest of the day? Trip felt something unusual happen when he heard the word boyfriend. Not panic exactly, but a mixture of surprise and satisfaction he was not accustomed to. Work. Reorganize the inventory. Extremely exciting things. Romantic. You knew that when you agreed to try. True. She stood, picking up the empty cups. I'm going to finish that dresser I promised to deliver tomorrow. But shall we have dinner together, here, in the atelier? I was thinking of going out, going to a restaurant, where normal people go on dates. That sounds dangerously close to an official date. That is because it is. Michaella offered her hand to help him up. We already skipped about 3 stages of a normal relationship. We can do a few things in the right order. Trip took her hand and got to his feet. All right, dinner. What time? 7, that works great. She kissed him quickly again, a gesture that was already starting to feel natural. And Trip. Yes. Try not to panic during the day. I do not panic. You do. But I like you anyway. She stepped into the atelier, waving over her shoulder, and left Trip alone on the Main Street sidewalk with the surreal sense that his life had changed drastically in the last 24 hours. He went back to the shop, opened the doors, put Billie Holiday on the record player, and tried to focus on the inventory. He lasted exactly 20 minutes before Bobby showed up, as always, with coffee and an expression of pure, mischievous delight. So, Bobby said, settling onto the stool at the counter, you finally admitted you have normal human feelings. Good morning to you too, good morning, now talk. How was it? How was what? The kiss, the conversation after, the existential crisis you probably had at 3 in the morning. Trip sorted through a few receipts without looking at him. There was no existential crisis, lies. There was a small existential crisis, brief, controlled. Bobby laughed. I knew it. And now? What are you two? Boyfriends? Just dating? Neighbors with emotional benefits? Boyfriends, I think. The words still sounded strange. We talked this morning. We decided to try something real. Look at you, being mature and communicative. Bobby took a sip of coffee. I am proud. Thank you, and terrified. Because you are going to sabotage this somehow. Trip stopped pretending he was organizing things. Thank you for the confidence. It is not a lack of confidence. It is historical knowledge. Bobby leaned on the counter. You have a well-established pattern of pulling away when things get real. And I just want to make sure you will not do that this time. I will not. Are you sure? No. The honesty slipped out before he could filter it. But I will try not to. Does that count? It counts. Bobby smiled. Gentler now. And listen, if you start to panic or feel like sabotaging everything, call me. I will give you an irritating lecture that will bring you back to reason. How generous. I am a wonderful friend. Bobby stood, tossing his coffee cup in the trash. And speaking of wonderful friends, Penelope and Grace are planning a celebration dinner. Celebration for what? For you two finally stopping being stubborn. It will be on Friday. Mandatory attendance. Can we refuse? You can. But they will show up here anyway. Bobby walked to the door. Enjoy your day, boyfriend, and try not to ruin everything before the day is over. He left, leaving Trip alone with Billie Holiday and the realization of how his life had become simultaneously more complicated and more interesting. Dinner took place at the small Italian restaurant by the pier, a place Trip had walked past for years but had never entered. Michaella was waiting at the door when he arrived, wearing a light green dress, and her hair pulled into a low bun that exposed her neck in a way that was undeniably distracting. You look wonderful, he said, and it was the first time in years that the compliment left his mouth without ulterior motives or irony. Thank you. She smiled. You look presentable too. Presentable, what a warm compliment. I am saving the warm compliment for later. She took his hand as they walked in, and the touch was already starting to feel natural. Dinner was surprisingly easy. They talked about small things and big ones, laughed about memories from the fair, debated which pasta was superior with the same intensity they used when arguing about paint colors. And between courses, Michaella reached across the table, intertwined her fingers with his, and Tripp felt something he had forgotten the sensation of. Contentment. Simple, uncomplicated contentment. "Thank you," he said in the middle of dessert. "For what?" "For not giving up. Even when I was a challenge. You still are." She squeezed his hand, offering a slow smile. "But now you are my challenge. That is a little possessive. You like it. Unfortunately, I do." When they left the restaurant, the night was clear, filled with stars. They walked along the sidewalk hand in hand, unhurried, and when they reached Main Street, Michaella stopped in front of the atelier. "So," she said, turning to him, "the official end of the first date. It was good. Only good. Great. Exceptional. Possibly the best dinner I have had in years. Better." She slipped her arms around his neck. "And now comes the part where we share a goodnight kiss the way normal people do. Are we normal now? No. But we can pretend." Tripp pulled her close, kissing her slowly, savoring the taste of red wine and tiramisu. There was no rush, no urgency like at the fair, just the two of them on the empty Main Street sidewalk, discovering that this could in fact work. When they parted, they were both smiling. "Good night, Tripp." "Good night, Michaella." She stepped inside the atelier, waving before closing the door, and Tripp remained there for another minute, processing that this was real, that he had a girlfriend, that for the first time in 5 years, he was willing to take a risk again. And as he climbed the stairs to the apartment, he grabbed his phone and sent Bobby a message. "I did not ruin it. Yet." The reply came 3 seconds later. "Progress. Now keep it that way." And as unlikely as it would have seemed 3 months earlier, when a noisy neighbor had barged into his carefully organized life, Tripp Clark believed he could, because some things were worth the risk, and Michaella Bennett was definitely one of them. 7 months after the fall fair, on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May, Tripp Clark was standing in the small garden, wearing a gray suit that Bobby had insisted he buy, and a navy blue tie that Michaella had chosen, trying to remember how to breathe. "You look pale," Bobby observed beside him, adjusting his tie. "Like, paler than usual." "I am not." "Yes, you are. You look like you saw a ghost, or like you are about to pass out." "I am not going to pass out." "Great, because if you do, I will make sure to record it and show everyone." Bobby patted his shoulder. "Relax, it is just a wedding. It is just the biggest commitment of your adult life. No big deal." "You are not helping." "I am not trying to help. I am entertaining myself." Bobby looked around the garden decorated with white flowers and wooden chairs arranged in rows. "But seriously, man, are you sure about this?" Tripp turned to him, genuinely surprised. "You are asking me that now? 20 minutes. Before the ceremony? Better now than after the officiant asks if you accept. I am sure." And it was true. In the last 7 months, Michaella had become an essential part of his life in a way he never thought possible. They fought over silly things, laughed at inside jokes no one else understood, and had built something solid in the midst of the chaos. More sure than I have ever been about anything. "Good." Bobby smiled, genuine this time. "Because she is too." "I asked her." "You asked her?" "Obviously. Someone had to verify that the two of you were not entering a marriage out of sheer stubbornness." Bobby adjusted his jacket. "But you two are good. You are annoyingly perfect for each other." "Thanks. You are welcome. Now breathe, and try not to cry when she walks in." "I am not going to cry." "Everyone says that. Everyone lies." Across the garden, inside the room where the women were getting ready, Michaella adjusted her simple ivory silk dress for the fourth time while Penelope tried to fix a loose hair clip, and Grace applied the final layer of lip gloss. "You are nervous," Grace observed, putting the gloss back in her purse. "I am not." "Yes, you are," Penelope corrected, finally managing to secure the clip. "You have been fiddling with your ring for 5 minutes. That is your nervous tick." Michaella looked at her own hand and realized she was, in fact, turning her engagement ring. "All right, maybe a little nervous." "Why?" Grace asked gently. "You love him. He loves you. You have been living together for 3 months." "I know. It is just that marriage seems so final." "That is kind of the point," Penelope said, sitting down in the chair nearby. "Final is good. It means you stopped fighting the obvious." "We still fight," Michaella admitted with a smile. "Last week we fought about where to put the new sofa. And who won? A tie. We put it halfway between both options. Mature compromise," Grace approved. "You are ready." Penelope stood up and picked up the simple bouquet of white peonies. "And speaking of ready, you look beautiful. Tripp is going to lose it when he sees you." "He better not lose it. He needs to say 'I do' coherently." "He will say it. Probably in that sarcastic tone you two use for everything." Penelope handed her the bouquet. "But he will say it." The ceremony was short, just as they had requested. The justice of the peace was a white-haired gentleman who had known Tripp since he was a child and had a dry sense of humor that matched the wedding's tone perfectly. The chairs were filled with friends, Main Street neighbors, and a few people Michaella had met in the past months in Harborview. When the music began, a simple local musician playing the guitar, Tripp turned and saw Michaella appearing at the garden entrance. Bobby was right. He felt a knot tighten in his throat, and he had to take a deep breath to maintain his composure. She was radiant, smiling in that way that lit up the entire space, and when their eyes met, she subtly rolled her eyes and shook her head as if to say, "Do not cry, Grumpy." He laughed quietly, and everything became easier. Michaella walked down the aisle accompanied by her sister, past the rows of guests and finally reached his side. Tripp took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and whispered, "You look perfect." "I know," she whispered back. "You are presentable too." Always with the warm compliments. "It is my gift." The officiant cleared his throat, clearly amused. "If you two are done flirting, shall we begin?" "Yes," Tripp and Michaella said together, then laughed at their synchronicity. The ceremony was exactly what they wanted. No pomp, no drama, just simple words about commitment and choice. When it came time for the vows, Tripp pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Seriously?" Michaella asked. "You wrote them down? Did not you?" "No, I was going to improvise." "Of course you were." He unfolded the paper. "Michaella, 7 months ago I swore to myself that I would never get involved with someone who drove me crazy, and then you showed up with an electric drill at 6 in the morning and destroyed that whole plan." There was laughter among the guests. "You are stubborn, provocative, incapable of leaving things alone, and also the most genuine, talented, and surprising person I know. I promise to annoy you on purpose. When you least expect it, organize your furniture without permission and love you every day for the rest of my life, even when you insist on starting renovations before 8 in the morning." Michaella was laughing and wiping her eyes. "That was good. Thanks. Your turn." She took a deep breath, no paper, just looking at him. "Tripp, when I moved to Harborview, I was not looking for romance. I was looking for peace, quiet, a calm life. And then you showed up complaining about noise, as if it were a matter of national security." More laughter. "You are too methodical, too stubborn, and you hoard emotions like rare records on a high shelf. But you are also the most loyal, funny, and unexpectedly romantic person I know. I promise to mess up your organization occasionally, make noise at inappropriate times, and love you every day, even when you act like you are 80 years old. I do not act like I am 80 years old. Yes, you do. Bobby yelled from the front. The officiant laughed. "I will consider those vows complete. Now the rings?" Bobby handed over the rings and they exchanged them with slightly trembling hands. When Tripp slid the ring onto Michaella's finger, something shifted in the air between them. Something definitive, permanent, frightening, and perfect. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant announced. "You may kiss the bride, or she can kiss you. You decide." Tripp pulled Michaella close. "Together?" "Always together." She wrapped her arms around his neck, and they kissed amidst applause, whistling, and sarcastic comments from Bobby about, "finally." The reception took place right there in the garden, with simply decorated tables. There were speeches. Bobby was first, climbing onto a chair with a glass of champagne. "I have known Tripp for 27 years, he began, "and in all that time I have never seen him smile as much as he has in the last 7 months. Michaella, you achieved the impossible. You made this man admit he has feelings. You deserve an award or financial compensation, probably both. But seriously, you two are perfect together. You fight about everything, agree on nothing, and yet you work better than any couple I know. To Tripp and Michaella, may you have decades of arguments about irrelevant things and the kind of love that annoys everyone around you." "Cheers," everyone shouted. Penelope was next, elegant and direct. "When Michaella told me she had met a guy who complained about noise, I thought, that is going nowhere. But then I saw the two of you together, fighting over paint colors with that ridiculous intensity, and I realized it was exactly the kind of nowhere that turns into everything. You challenge each other, you provoke each other, and you love each other in a way that is honest and real, and that is rare. To the most stubborn couple Harborview has ever seen." Grace was last, and as always, she was sweet but sharp. Mature love is not about rampant passion or grand gestures. It is about choosing someone every day, even when they leave records scattered around the house or start renovations too early. You two chose each other even when it seemed inconvenient, and that is what makes it work. May you keep choosing each other, always. The party extended until the sun began to set. Tripp and Michaella danced their first dance with the same lack of coordination with which they did everything, laughing when he stepped on her foot and she intentionally retaliated. "Is that revenge?" he asked. "Obviously." She rested her head on his shoulder. "But I love you anyway." "Good to know." He kissed the top of her head. "Because now you are stuck with me." "Technically, you are stuck with me too. The best destiny I could have." 5 months later, on a cold October morning, Michaella was sitting in the kitchen of their apartment above the shop, drinking chamomile tea and trying not to think too much about the fact that morning sickness was a cruel lie, because it happened all day long. Tripp walked in, already dressed for work, and paused when he saw her. "Again?" "Again." She grimaced. "Your child apparently decided that everything I eat is offensive." "Our daughter," he corrected, sitting beside her and placing his hand on her still small belly. "And she has good taste. You ate sugary cereal for breakfast." They were the only ones. That did not make me want to die. Dramatic, but there was affection in his tone. He gently stroked her belly, and Michaella felt the baby move slightly, as she always did when Tripp was near. "She likes you more than me," Michaella complained. "This is intrauterine betrayal. Or she just recognizes good taste when she feels it." He kissed her shoulder. "Are you going to be okay today?" "I will be. Penelope and Grace are stopping by later. We are going to pretend we are painting. Things for the baby's room, but we are actually just going to eat ice cream and complain about everything." "Solid plan." Tripp stood up, picking up his coffee cup. "I will be downstairs if you need anything. And no noise today, right? You promised." "I promised. No power tools." She paused. "But maybe I will use the sander for about 20 minutes. "Michaella, 15 minutes maximum. You never change. You would not want me if I changed." "True." He leaned in, kissing her, slowly. "I love you, annoying wife. I love you, grumpy husband." When he went downstairs to the shop, Michaella remained sitting there for a few more minutes, her hand on her belly, thinking about how her life had changed. A year ago, she was newly arrived in Harborview, alone, starting from scratch. Now she had a husband who organized her furniture without permission, but who also made her tea every morning, friends who showed up unannounced to eat ice cream, and a baby on the way, who would grow up listening to jazz and learning that arguments about irrelevant things could be demonstrations of love. It was not what she had planned, but it was infinitely better. Downstairs, Tripp put Miles Davis on the turntable and smiled at the wall separating the shop from the studio. On the other side, he could hear Michaella starting to sand something, even though she had promised not to make noise. He shook his head, amused. Some habits never change, and he would not want it any other way. Because in the end, after all the sarcasm, provocation, and arguments about schedules, they had discovered something rare. A love that did not need to be perfect to be real. One that worked precisely because they stopped fighting who they were and started building something together. And as the sound of the sander mixed with Miles Davis, creating the strangest, most perfect soundtrack possible, Tripp Clark thought that perhaps, after all, small towns and noisy neighbors were not so bad. In fact, they were exactly what he needed, and always had been. Later, when the shop traffic slowed down and the sander finally fell silent, Tripp walked over to the studio, as if wanting to prolong that domestic moment that, for him, was worth more than any grand gesture. He found Michaella sitting on the floor surrounded by paint samples, brushes, and an open toolbox, the organized chaos that always announced she was happy. She looked up when he leaned against the doorframe. "Are you going to lecture me because I made noise?" "No." He approached, kneeling before her. "I came to see if you still love me after destroying my peace of mind for the 10th time today." She laughed, that soft laugh that always dismantled his defenses. "I love you precisely for that. Because you complain, you grumble, you overorganize, and yet you still come back here to ask me if I still love you." Tripp slid his hands over her face, like someone holding something precious. "I have loved you since the day you woke me up at 6:20 in the morning, with the sound of the drill and called me grumpy." "You were grumpy." "I was lonely," he corrected, his voice lower. "You were just the first person who noticed." Michaella took a deep breath, her gaze softening. "Tripp, you changed my life. Not because you tried to be perfect, but because you were you. Grumpy, stubborn, intense, and mine. Totally yours." He leaned closer to her. "And no, I do not say it often or well, but I have never loved anyone like this, never wanted anyone like this, never imagined it was possible to feel so right." She pulled his face toward hers for a slow, sweet, deep kiss, the kind that says everything words cannot reach. "Then do not ruin this by being too humble," she murmured against his mouth. "You love me. I love you. It is simple." "Simple with you," he whispered back. "With anyone else it would be impossible." They stayed, like that for a moment, breathing the same air, surrounded by so much imperfection and so much peace at the same time, until Michaella rested her hand on her own belly, an automatic, tender gesture. "She's going to be so lucky, Tripp. She is going to have you," he said, kissing her palm. "So luck is guaranteed." Michaella smiled, that smile that always seemed to light up more than any lamp in the studio. "And she is going to have you too, even if you grumble, even if you organize my things secretly. I do it out of love. You do it because you are controlling. Both." He raised an eyebrow. "But mostly out of love." She laughed and pulled him close again. "Then just stay here with me for a minute. Just one. I will stay for all of them." And there, in that studio full of paint, dust, and jazz filtered through the wooden floor, the two hugged in a quiet, profound way, the kind of hug that seals destinies, that rests the soul, that says I am here without needing effort. The small town, the noise, the arguments, the paint colors, the teasing, the baby on the way, the uncertain future, All of it was part of the picture they were painting together. Nothing perfect, but absolutely theirs. And for the first time in his life, Trip Clark realized that loving someone was not losing control. It was finally finding the right place to rest. And that's how the story of Trip and Michaella comes to an end. Two wounded hearts who discovered that mature love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be real. If you believe in second chances and enjoyed this romantic comedy filled with sarcasm, teasing, and undeniable chemistry, leave your like, subscribe for more stories, and tell us in the comments which scene stole your heart. Don't forget to hype this video so more people can discover that love can begin in the most unexpected places, even in a war between stubborn neighbors. Your engagement helps the channel grow and bring more stories that celebrate true love in all its forms. See you in the next one.